Hi everyone, this is my review of Supernatural Season 6, Episode 7, called Family Matters. This episode started out with Sam waking up and Dean and Cass standing over him. Cass did his whole reaching into Sam's chest to see if his soul had been tampered with in any way, and he found out that Sam didn't have a soul. This explains a lot because Sam hasn't really been himself lately, and I've heard from other viewers that if you don't have a soul, your whole personality, basically who you were with a soul, you're basically nobody without a soul. And I don't know how Sam's walking around at this point. I'm wondering if he's possessed and some demon's taking control of his body. So Dean says, let's go to the one person that Sam has been spending the most time this past year with. So they go to Grandpa Campbell, and Dean says, what do you know? And at this point, Grandpa Campbell did not know that Sam's soul was missing. And Grandpa Campbell's like, well, I know what you know. And then Dean's like, well, recap it for a wingman. And Grandpa Campbell looks over at Cass, and he's like, you're Castiel. Cass shakes his head. And Grandpa Campbell's like, well, you're scrawnier than I pictured. And Cass is like, well, this is just my vessel. My actual height or size is about the size of your Chrysler building. And then he's like, well, stop bragging, And then Cass does this whole reaching into Grandpa's chest and finds out he does have a soul. So we at least know that Grandpa has a soul. Sure doesn't act like it sometimes. And then because, Grandpa was screaming when Cass did the whole reaching into your chest to check your soul thing, he alerts Christian. Christian comes in with alarmed, and then they start talking about this hunt that for vampires, and Sam's like, well, what hunt? Or what time is the hunt? And Grandpa's like, well, it's sunup. And Sam's like, well, I didn't know anything. And then Grandpa and Dean share a look, and Dean's like, well, it's because of me. You don't trust me. And Grandpa's like, no, I trust you. And so Dean's like, well, then we're going. And Grandpa's like, no. And, well, Dean's like, well, then it's because you don't trust me. And Grandpa's like, well, I don't know you. And then Dean said, you're in charge. I trust you. And then the next scene is of Sam and Dean walking out towards the car. And Dean's like, I don't trust him. He's shady. He's hiding something. And Sam's like, he's our grandfather. And Dean's like, well, family does not mean the same to him as it does to us. So then Sam's like, what do you want us to do? And I don't know if both boys went back into the building. And, well, then Dean's looking around, looking inside, rooms, breaking into rooms is more like it. And he runs into Christian, and they have their own little conversation. And it's basically Christian saying, you know what, I try to like you, I just don't, basically, is what he's saying. He's like, you haven't been on the hunt for the past year. The only action you've seen is between your slutty girlfriend's legs. And then Dean pushes him against the wall, and Christian's like, well, maybe you shouldn't go on this hunt. Accidents happen. And then Dean's like, well, I have your back. And then he's pats him on the back, or more slaps him on the back. And then the next scene is of the Campbells and Sam, basically the whole crew, in this forest-like area. And Dean and Gwen get left behind, and Gwen's like, well, I get left behind with the reject. And Dean, and then the Campbells leave, and then Gwen's like, well, sorry about the reject comment. I just get sick and tired of being left behind. I'm sick of Samuel thinking I'm his daughter, or comparing me to his daughter. And then, Dean says, it's okay. And Then Gwen gets attacked by a vampire. Dean tries to pull it off, and then the vampire attacks Dean, and then Gwen has enough time to get up and cuts the vampire's head off. Blood gets all over Dean's face. He's wiping the blood off, and then here's like gunshots in the distance. So he goes off, runs in the direction of the gunshots, and he comes along this fence, where inside he sees a whole bunch of eyes, blood, and heads, and then he sees this girl or woman. She's inside this house, I think, and she's screaming her head off, and then I only can assume she gets her head cut off. And then, Dean's walking along, and I think he's going back towards Gwen, and he comes around this house, building, whatever, and he turns the corner, and he sees the Campbells and Sam putting this vampire into this van. He had a bag over his head and his arms and legs bound together. And then Dean goes back to Gwen, and she's like, "Where have you been?" And then the Campbells come along, and they're like, "Is everything okay?" And Gwen's like, "Yeah, we just caught a runner." And then the next scene is of Sam and Dean in the car, and Dean pulls the car over, and he's like, "I saw what was going on back there." And he's like, "Well, what are the Campbells doing with these alphas?" Sam's like, "Well, or they're interrogating them." And Dean's like, "Well, what are they interrogating them about?" And Sam's like, "I don't know." He's like, "Have you ever been inside one of these interrogations?" Sam's like, "No." And he's like, "Have you asked any questions?" And I don't think Sam really had an answer. And Dean's like, "Well, if we're gonna hunt together, you have to tell me the truth. You can't hide things from me. It's basically my way or the highway, or you can go back to the Campbells and hunt with them." And for a minute there, I thought Sam was gonna go back to the Campbells, because he does go back to Grandpa and says he wants on the interrogations, and Grandpa says, "No, you need to do what you've been doing." Basically, he doesn't trust Sam. And so Sam goes back to Dean. Wow, I can't keep him straight tonight. Sam goes back to Dean, and they go where the vampire is being interrogated. They see this huge vampire. By the way, great actor you got to play the vampire. I know I recognize him from somewhere. I just can't place him. He's bound to a chair. He had these huge long fingernails. He's digging into the chair, making scratching marks, and then the boys interrogate him and find out that Samuel wants to know where Purgatory is. Samuel thinks the alpha vampire knows, but turns out he doesn't really know where it's at. Then the Campbells come in, and Sam and Dean and the Campbells get in this huge altercation. In the meantime, the vampire gets loose, and he kidnaps one of the hunters and just kind of takes off with him. Then Samuel wants to capture the vampire again, and he's like, "Well, you can't do that." And Samuel kind of gives him a look, and Dean's like, "If you just capture him again, he's going to kill us all. You have to kill him." And then Dean's like, "Well, if you and me and Sam if we get out of this alive, we're going to have a serious family meeting." And then they find out where the vampire is at, and then they get in their whole fight with the vampire, and then the vampire is talking to Sam, and in the meantime, Christian cuts his head off. And shocker, I didn't see this one coming. Christian was a demon. I don't know if it was for the whole time or just part of the time or what. And then all of a sudden the vampire and the demons go vanish in this blast of white light. And the person, or the thing, creature, or person standing there was Crowley. And everybody's kind of looking like, what the heck had just happened? And Grandpa Campbell's like, well, bring my nephew back. And, like, what, what nephew or whatever. And then Grandpa Campbell's the one you just stuffed the demon into. And I think Crowley's trying to allude that Christian's been a demon the whole time. But then we find out that Crowley was the one who pulled Sam out of hell and pulled Samuel out of heaven. And then we also find out that Crowley has Sam's soul because he wants to know where Purgatory is, which Samuel's working for him to find out where Purgatory is. Don't know why. I'm thinking because he wants Mary or Diana's soul, or Deanna's soul, or maybe both back. Maybe they're in Purgatory. And then we also find out that if Sam and Dean and the Campbells work for Crowley, Crowley will give Sam's soul back. He wants what I think Crowley wants to do, from what I can gather, is he wants to rule Purgatory and whatnot. I don't think Crowley has Sam's soul. That's just my guess. I think, here's my total guess. This has no proof backing it up whatsoever. I just think this would be good for shock value. Maybe not so much. I think he's working for Raphael or Balthazar. That's my guess. But, no proof backing that up whatsoever. In the last scene, or second to last scene, it shows Sam, Dean, and Grandpa Campbell kind of standing there talking. And Sam's really mad at Grandpa. He has a gun on him, or pulls a gun on him and everything. He's ready to kill him. And Dean said, hold it, wait. And basically Dean lets Grandpa Campbell go. I'm kind of glad he did. At this point, I want to like him, I just can't. But I like Gwen now. I think she'll switch her loyalties over to Dean, so that's good. And then the last scene is of Sam and Dean. They're headed out to the car again, I think. And basically shows Dean, he's like, I don't want to work for Crowley. And Sam's like, well, what other choice do we have? And Dean's like, Dean didn't really say anything. And Sam's like, we'll figure something else out. And Dean's like, well, what do we do then? And I don't really think Sam has an answer. I'm really, really, really nervous about next week. I think Cass is back, so I'm excited for that. But it shows Sam and Dean, basically they're like snipers. They have a bunch of guns on top of buildings, and they're about to kill something or someone. So, yeah, looks kind of scary. Well, that's my review of this week's episode. See you next week. Bye.